My name is Jamil Evans, and on behalf of the Office of Justice Programs, Territories Financial Support Center, I want to welcome you to our video presentation on conference costs. In this video, you will learn the conference cost categories, the cost thresholds and limitations, and tips on completing the conference and event submissions form. So why is this topic important? As a grantee, if you wish to conduct or host a conference while using award funds, you must ensure that it is consistent with this approved grant application and is reasonable when necessary to achieve the goals and objectives of the grant. According to 2 CFR 200.432, a conference is defined as a meeting, retreat, seminar, symposium, workshop, or event whose primary purpose is the dissemination of technical information beyond the grant recipient entity and is necessary and reasonable for successful performance under the federal award. To determine whether costs associated with meetings and conferences are reasonable and necessary, grantees should follow all applicable statutory and regulatory requirements outlined in 2 CFR 200-Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for federal awards. For example, grantees should always consider whether there are more effective or efficient alternatives, such as virtual events, for example, webinars and video conferences, which can accomplish the desired results at a lower cost. Every effort should be made to conduct conferences via webinar, teleconference, or video conference. In-person, face-to-face conferences should only be held when necessary and no other option exists to conduct business without travel and related costs. In addition, grantees should consider how a meeting or conference will be perceived by the public as a good use of taxpayer dollars. So, what do we mean by conference costs? Conference costs and conference expenses mean all the costs using DOJ funds associated with planning, hosting, sponsoring, or otherwise holding any conferences. The most common allowable conference costs are conference meeting space, audio-visual equipment and services, printing and distribution, meals and incidental expense portion of the per diem, lodging, air travel to and from the conference. Here's a list of some additional allowable cost categories. Local transportation, such as taxi, rental car, or private vehicle to and from the airport. Logistical conference planner, programmatic conference planner, trainers, instructors, presenters, or facilitators. Other costs that must be individually identified. And then finally, indirect costs and overhead rates apply to direct costs associated with the conference in accordance with the negotiated agreements. The federally approved indirect cost agreement should cover the date of the event. All indirect costs associated with the conference must be applied to the above categories as appropriate and reported as conference costs. Meals and refreshments provided by the conference attendees are generally not allowable costs for conferences funded under OJP office awards, unless the recipient obtains written prior approval to the OJP office. This applies to all awards, including contracts, grants, and cooperative agreements. In general, DOJ may approve such costs only in cases where sustenance is not otherwise available, such as in extremely remote areas. The size of the event and nearby food and beverage vendors would make it impractical to not provide meals and/or refreshments, or a special presentation at a conference requires a plenary address where there is no other time for sustenance to be obtained. Water provided at no cost to the OJP COPS Office Award is allowable without prior approval. Also, there are cost limits on meals. If prior approval is obtained to provide food and beverages at an event, DOJ and its grantees, cooperative agreement recipients, and contractors must follow all limits in the food and beverage policy on meals. All conferences conducted by cooperative agreement recipients or federal procurement contractors funded by OJP must obtain OJP's written prior approval prior to the event. For conferences costing $100,000 or less and not exceeding any cost thresholds, must be submitted 90 days in advance of the start date. For conferences costing more than $100,000 or exceeding any one cost threshold, must be submitted a minimum of 120 days in advance of the start date. Please keep in mind that an approved award budget is not prior approval. Conferences conducted by grant recipients do not require prior approval. However, grant recipients must ensure compliance with food and beverage, meeting room and audio-visual, logistical planner, and programmatic planner limitations and cost thresholds. The cost thresholds and limitations are as follows. Meeting room and audio-visual services, lesser of $25 per day per attendee or $20,000. Logistical planners, lesser of $50 per attendee or $8,750. Programmatic planners, lesser of $200 per attendee or $35,000. Food and beverage, generally not allowed. Refreshments, generally not allowed. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the conference and event submission form and share some tips on how to submit it. First, as stated before, grant recipients do not require prior approval for events or conferences that are part of their scope of work. They only have to follow the cost thresholds and limitations. Prior approval is required for cooperative agreement recipients and federal procurement contractors, and they must also follow the cost thresholds and limitations. In addition to prior approval, they must also complete the conference and event submission form. OJP developed a checklist of 9 questions to help cooperative agreements and federal procurement contractors clarify what constitutes a conference or event and what qualifies as operational meetings or technical assistance visits. If a cooperative agreement recipient or federal procurement contractor answers no to all 9 questions, then prior approval is not required. On the other hand, if they answer yes to one of the questions, then prior approval is required. The 9 questions are: is the cost of the event greater than $20,000? Are there meeting room costs? Are there audio-video costs greater than $25 per attendee or more than $1,000 in total? Are there any food and beverage costs? Did the request for meeting come from multiple jurisdictions or agencies? Are the trinkets being purchased? Is there a formal published agenda? Are formal discussions or presentation panels planned? Are there logistical planning costs beyond incremental internal administrative costs necessary to arrange travel and lodging for a small number of individuals? For example, planning, managing attendee registration, and/or travel. This checklist should be utilized to assist with questions regarding the definition and differences between operational meetings or technical assistance visits. As previously mentioned, all OJP recipients must thoroughly review all planned or proposed conference costs to ensure that such costs are reasonable and absolutely necessary, and when applicable, why a cheaper alternative has not been proposed. Each submission should include a statement discussing why the event cannot be conducted via webinar, teleconference, or video conference. This can be done on a separate tab of the conference and event submission form. The most common mistake made by grantees when seeking prior approval is lack of sufficient explanation and justification of the proposed event. All supporting documentation should be attached with the submission form. This ensures one file per submission, reduces the number of questions, and reduces the possibility of necessary information getting lost or separated from the main submission file. Lastly, for all BJA events, the conference and event submission form should be sent to bjaconferencesports@usdoj.gov. For all other OJP events, forms should be sent to conferencecosts.ojp@ojp.usdoj.gov. All conference costs for events held by cooperative agreement recipients or contractors costing more than $20,000 or where more than 50% of the attendees are DOJ employees must be reported within 45 calendar days after the last day of the event. Completed reports for OJP recipients should be emailed to OJP Conference Cost Reporting at ojp.usdoj.gov. I hope you found this short presentation about conference costs helpful. For more information about conference costs, we encourage you to review the DOJ Grants Financial Guide. To learn more about the OJP Territories Financial Support Center, please visit our website at ojp.gov/TFSC or contact us at ojptfsc@usdoj.gov for additional resources or assistance. If you would like to stay up to date on our videos, click the subscribe button. Thank you for watching.